Welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you'll know when new videos are available. I really hope you enjoy this one. All right. So my intention is to finish. We're pretty well through paragraph 3, which is really the most of the discussion. The rest of the paragraphs are just more detailed descriptions of what's happening in paragraph 3. So we'll kind of run through those, but I want to make sure that we finish this today. So try to keep questions on topic and, type the chat and raise your hand, and I'll get to those questions as I can. Other than that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now so that we can get started. All right. So you should be looking at at the top of the page there is 3Q2. Okay. And we talked about that already. That was the wildlife. We talked about adding reports like termite repair and any other reports you might ask that you might want to include, and the dangers of asking for the termite report. Things like that. That makes, asking, requiring, or requesting a termite report generally leads to the lender requiring termite clearance. Okay, moving on. 3Q4. So earlier we had talked about that the seller has 7 days to install the smoke detectors, the carbon monoxide detectors, and the water heater bracing. That's already in the contract that the seller has to do those things in the first 7 days. This technically is who's going to pay for it. So, as an example, if you wanted to say as buyer, I'm going to pay for that, if the seller did the work, installed all those things, submitted a bill to escrow that said this is what the cost was, the buyer could pay that cost for the work that the seller did in escrow. That's not the norm, right? So that's not something that is normally going to happen. I would, and I don't think most listing agents or sellers are that adamant that they're not going to do that work. So check off the seller. Okay. Q5 and Q6 are two things that are heavily contested in just about every aspect by listing agents, by sellers. It happens all the time. Paragraph Q3, Q5, government required point of sale inspections and reports. That is just the inspection. So City of LA, it's the 9A report. Compton, it's the pre-sale inspection. Linwood, it's the pre-sale inspection. Southgate, it's the pre-sale inspection. Maywood, it's a pre-sale inspection. Huntington Park, it's a pre-sale inspection. That is the actual inspection and the report that is generated by that inspection. Now, most cities, like 99% of them, will only allow the seller or the listing agent to order that report. So, by default, the request should be from you as buyer's agent, seller to provide, pay for, because remember this section that we talked about, we started last week, is allocation of costs. Who's paying for it? We're asking you, seller, to pay for it. Now, even if for some reason they decided to negotiate that the buyer was going to pay for this, the seller would still be the one that had to order it. The listing agent may still be the one that has to order it. So that's it's a reimbursement from the buyer to the seller. This report has to get ordered. There are no cities that allow you. Well, I'll take that back. There are a couple places where you can pay to waive it and sign some paperwork, but 99% of the cities that require pre-sale inspections do not allow you to waive the inspection. Now, taking responsibility for the work after, we're going to talk about that in Q6, but Q5, ordering that report is not normally an option of avoiding it. And in places like Compton, it can become a crime because that's a misdemeanor charge for not having that as part of your transaction. Let's see, in the chat, when people check this box for seller to pay and say the city has a pre-sale and there is work to be done in order of the house to sell, is that how it works? No, the report is just the report. Q6 is the corrective actions that are stated in the reports. So These could be two separate things, to be honest, and it makes sense. The seller has to provide the report. So I generally say, hey, as seller, here, this is it. Seller, you're paying for the report. Please go get that. I forgot to check that out too. Seller, go order the report, right? And then that report is required to be delivered with the rest of the paperwork that the seller is required to deliver, which is in the first 7 days after acceptance. So as listing agents, as sellers, we have to start thinking with cities like Southgate, where it takes a couple weeks to even get an inspection done and then a couple weeks to get a report back. You're 4 weeks in. If you're waiting till you have an offer accepted, you're not going to close on time, and you can't close without it, period. So listing agents, I go into a listing agreement with someone who's selling a property in Southgate. I need to order that pre-sale inspection immediately. But that's the inspection, right? We get that. And in those inspections, it's going to say what things need to be, changed, fixed, updated, whatever it is, permits that need to be ordered, whatever needs to be done. Q6 is then who's responsible for paying for that stuff. So if I, as a buyer's agent, call the listing agent and say, hey, pre-sale inspection, you guys are going to provide that, right? Oh, yes, we already have it. We're going to do it, but we're going to be countering that buyers take responsibility for those corrective actions, for those repairs, that they do what is necessary in order to take on that responsibility. If I know that as a buyer's agent, I can check off buyer on this. So it doesn't now constitute a counter. Whether the listing agent chooses to create that counter anyway because they don't know that that's what that means, that's going to happen. But I can at least show the listing agent, hey, we're willing to take care of this section. Most cities allow the buyers to take that on. Okay. There's certain steps that they'll have to go through, signing some affidavits, getting some things notarized, whatever. There's some things they'll have to do, but most cities will allow them to take that on. So if I do that and I put in 3Q6, hey, buyer's going to be responsible, technically seller does not have to counter me. But if my buyer's not willing to do that and we're still going to ask for the seller to do those corrective actions, then we're going to check off seller and send it and let them counter us. Okay. Can Q4 be left blank on all cash sale? I mean, it could be, but I don't know why you would want it to be. I mean, I understand where you're going is that there's not going to be an appraisal that's going to require those things. If your buyer is okay with the idea that there's no smoke alarms, there's no carbon monoxide detectors, and the water heater bracing may or may not be correct, that's up to you. But then that's a conversation you have with your buyer on whether they understand what that means and what the liability is. Because now if you don't have something in writing where they say, oh, we're not asking for them to install those things because there's no appraisal, and they don't install them technically correctly, and there's a fire or there's an earthquake and something happens to the property, who are they going to point their finger at? So yeah, go ahead on a cash deal if you want to, but make sure you have something in writing actively from the buyer saying, we understand that we're not getting those installed and we're okay with it. I'll be fine with that. Okay, so Q5 and 6, just know those cities that require those things, most of them don't allow you to waive it, and you can negotiate who's going to be responsible for the repairs. Now, for example, just real quick, City of Southgate, if you have a seller in the City of Southgate that wants to sell and says, hey, I don't want to do any of the repairs, ask them if they did the repairs when they bought the property, because if a seller who bought the property said they would take on the request, the responsibility for the corrective actions from that City of Southgate pre-sale inspection report, if they didn't complete the repairs in that 6-month period that they're given, you can't then push it off to the next buyer. That seller would have to complete those repairs prior to closing escrow. Okay, and have all those inspections done. So keep that in mind. It's a question to ask any sellers that you may be working with in the City of Southgate. Okay, any questions before I move on? No? All right, cool. Escrow fee. Always each their own. Okay, always each their own. And in most cases, if I'm writing an offer and I want to have an offer where I'm hoping to get an acceptance, I'm just leaving seller's choice because I know that counter's coming back anyway. I know it's coming back anyway of what escrow company is going to be. Now, if I'm really going to try to fight for my escrow, maybe it's an out of area listing agent, doesn't really know their office is somewhere in far away, and they're doing a favor for somebody close, and you want to kind of say to them, hey, we're going to use our escrow here close because it's in the area. They know the areas. They're familiar with all the rules. That's fine. Request it. But that comes down to communication with the listing agent, which obviously, we're not always great at. And I try to pressure you guys on that. Be very open with the listing agent, ask a lot of questions, talk to them as much as possible. Okay. So normally each their own. Now, again, we've talked about this in the past with strength of offer. If your buyer has the money to pay this, but they can't qualify to go higher in sales price, you could always say, hey, the buyer is going to pay for all the escrow fees, buyer side and seller side. That's not common, but you could do it. You could do it. And if you're getting a closing cost credit because you think, because you need the seller to pay some of the escrow fee, you don't check off seller, because then it's going to be seller's going to get the whole fee and there's going to be the credit. So as listing agent, keep your eyes open for that. And both, silly, right? You could do both 50-50. I see this all the time. The problem with 50-50, if I'm a listing agent, is technically if I'm getting some kind of a benefit for my seller, a discount from my escrow company, which happens on occasion, technically at 50-50, that benefit, that discount that I'm getting, I'm not getting the full discount, because now technically the escrow has to total the escrow fees together and then cut them in half to do the 50-50. So for a listing agent to have the ability to get my seller a discount, if there's a chance of that, each to pay their own, because their escrow fee could be $1 and the buyers would have the full on escrow fee. That's what each their own means. Okay. Questions about escrow? Not sure if it's okay to ask right now. 3K23. 3K23. Or you're talking about 3K2 and 3. I mean, it's okay. So just so you guys don't get confused, and I see this a lot, it's not 3K23. It's paragraph 3K, and this is paragraph 23, which is the reference. Okay. That's the reference paragraph, where if you want to know more about an assignment request, you go to paragraph 23. So I see this a lot in encounters where people are putting these paragraphs in. That's incorrect. So it's not 3K23. It's just 3K. Yeah, I mean, it is a little off topic, but fine. In order to avoid wholesalers from likelihood, can we use 3K to counter shorten? Yeah, of course. Yes, you can shorten it to 3 days. You can put it none. You could say we won't entertain any assignments. It's fine. You could do that. All right. Let's see. Where are we now? Owner's title policy. All right. So in this case, again, forget about the both. This is a seller only insurance policy, which means this is the seller is paying for the insurance, for the title company to ensure that clean title is going to be transferred over to the buyer. That is for the seller only. The seller pays for that. That's the norm. Again, if you want to try to increase the strength of your offer, you could say, hey, my buyer is going to pay for it. Okay. The norm is the seller, ask for it, not a big deal. You could say we're going to split that cost, but it doesn't make sense, because the buyer, since most of your buyers have a lender, the buyer is going to pay their own title insurance policy to protect the lender. And so I think sometimes people misunderstand how this works. So the owner's title insurance policy is what we're all aware of, because we see like prelims and things like that. And what it does is the title company goes through, looks through the general index, looks at the owner personally and the property, and looks for any liens or encumbrances that may affect the property. And then they make sure those get cleared up. And then they transfer the property over. Well, if the title company misses one of those encumbrances and now it becomes the responsibility of the new buyer, the title insurance is supposed to take care of that lien so that the new buyer doesn't have to. That's what the title insurance is for. So it's an insurance that's protecting the buyer against a seller's lien that may have gotten through the cracks. Okay. And that's normally why the seller pays for it. It's usually not an issue because it's a normal thing for the seller to pay for. What the buyer's lender title insurance policy is, now title checks the buyer for any liens or encumbrances that they may have personally that may get in the way of the lender if they needed to take action on the loan, right? Like that the buyer's not paying, or it also protects them from having somebody who has liens and encumbrances and judgments and things like that, and it may affect whether or not they can get qualified for. And then if a judgment does come up later, right, that wasn't on any of those general index reports, the title insurance protects the lender to make sure that they're stay in that first position and can't, lose out on their placement as far as, the money they loaned on the property. Okay. County transfer tax and fees, just like those in the past, always ask for the seller. It is the norm that the seller pays it. For the county of LA, for Orange County, for just about all the counties of California, it's $1.10 per thousand, right? So $1.10 per thousand. If it's a $500,000 sales price, you take $1.10, charge times it by 500, and that'll tell you what that county transfer tax is. Okay. The norm is the seller pays that. Most people don't push back on it. Again, just like all these other fees that exist as part of a transaction, you could say, as my buyer, because I have the cash, I don't have the qualifications, in order to make my offer look better, I'll pay this fee for you. But the norm is seller. And for most of you guys as buyer's agents, you're going to ask for that. And I would say that most listing agents aren't ever even going to question why the buyer is asking for that. Okay. City transfer tax. Not all cities have transfer taxes, but cities like LA, Santa Monica, Culver City, they have a city transfer tax. That city transfer tax is much more than the county transfer tax. As a matter of fact, I don't know. I think it's like, I always forget this number. It's the one number in my head that I cannot, like when I'm talking about this stuff, and I swear you guys that have been on this class, no, I can never remember the number. It's like it's $4.50 or something like that. Oh, Jonathan, thank you. $4.50. So that's $4.50 per thousand, right? So if I'm selling in the city of LA, not only do I have the $4.50 per thousand, I have the $1.10 per thousand. So that's $5.60 per thousand that they're going to pay out, right? That my sellers are going to pay for. So you have to understand those transfer taxes when you're doing your net sheet, specifically, that you have a conversation with your seller that they understand, because that's not a little bit of money, right? If you're talking about those transfer taxes. But like we said, you have a cash rich buyer that just doesn't have the qualifications but has the cash to do it, you could always improve your offer by offering to pay that transfer tax, and that's perfectly legal. Okay. Questions about the transfer taxes before I move on? No. All right. HOAs, the fee for preparing the disclosures from the HOA is the seller, and it's defaulted to the seller. The certification fee is defaulted to the buyer, right? The HOA transfer fees, that can be negotiated, the buyer or the seller. So again, norm is the seller, but the buyer could say, I'm going to take this on just to kind of offset some of the costs for you to improve my offer. That's perfectly legal. You could do that. Just know that all these HOA forms, the fees and all that stuff, they get paid through escrow, but like ordering the docs, the fee preparing those, all those things that they have to pay to the HOA to get them, they don't get started until the buyer puts their deposit in, so that the escrow has funds to pull on to pay for those things. Okay. So norm is we ask for the seller. Again, if you're the listing agent and you're saying my seller doesn't want to pay any of these fees, well, then you could counter it back. But these are defaulted to buyer and seller. Private transfer fees. This is not something that you're going to see a lot, but the private transfer fee is really defaulted to the seller. You can check off for the buyer to pay it, but the norm is that the seller pays this. And what this is generally, this is for someone who's reselling a new build, right? So you've bought a property in one of those, new construction developments. A lot of times those developers will put in a private transfer fee, which is once the seller who bought it from them, the owner that bought it from them, sells it to a third party, to the next buyer, they pay back to the developer this transfer fee. Okay. So that's normally a cost to the seller. Again, you could negotiate it. The majority of the stuff that we run into, right? The the homes that we're selling, the homes that have been built in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, those things that aren't part of those brand new construction developments generally don't have a private transfer fee. So it's not something you have to worry about, but it's already defaulted to seller. You don't have to do anything. So if it does pop up, then it would have to be something that was negotiated later when they found out about the fee, when the seller found out about the fee. Okay. Fees or costs. So earlier we talked about last week, we talked about the termite. And remember, this is where you would ask for the repairs, the termite repairs or termite clearance here, right? This is where you would ask for that so that you remember we have that, both of those things. So if the seller agrees to that and the lender requires that the seller's already agreed, I prefer that you guys don't have those things in there. But anything that you need that you have to address for a fee or a cost or whatever should be in here. Now, I know now that since we're using buyer representation, right, the BRBC or the PSRA, that BRBC or PSRA, we can put in there if our buyer is going to be paying a transaction coordinator fee, right, for using our transaction coordinator. We can put it in there. I still suggest that if your buyer is going to pay this, right, if they're going to pay this, that we still put it in with this verbiage and then check off the buyer and put the amount in here. Oh, ours is, what is it now? It's 325, I think, right? So we're going to put that in the purchase agreement, even though it's in the BRBC, because that BRBC is still an instruction of what the buyer is going to pay the broker. I still think it's better to put it in here just to make sure that escrow will honor it, because most escrows will not just honor an invoice coming from the transaction coordinator saying, hey, this needs to be paid by the buyer. If it's going to be paid by you, like if you're going to deduct it from your commission or you're going to pay it directly, you don't have to worry about this. You guys I think most of you guys know my feeling on the charging the client for the TC fee. I don't think it's their fee. I would pay my own if I was still doing transactions, but it's perfectly fine to do it this way. Just make sure it states commission, not fee, and you have the cost and that it's the buyer that's paying it. Okay. Home warranty. In this, please make sure that the amount you're asking for is going to cover the coverages that you want, right? Because sometimes I'll see people will put like, seller's going to pay, it's going to be, $600. And then they'll pick their company, right? And when you put in Old Republic, make sure that you put in Gloria's name, because if it's not our escrow and you just have Old Republic there, they can they'll use their rep with an outside escrow. I mean, our escrow is probably going to just go right to Gloria, but put your rep's name in there so that if they don't counter you to change who it is, your rep gets credit for that. Okay. Now, if I put $600 is more than a basic home warranty, right? But I don't have any coverages over here. So what I'm asking for is a basic home warranty and for the seller to pay a maximum of $600. So if I'm a listing agent and I get this and there's no coverages in here, I'm going to counter back the cost of a basic home warranty because they didn't ask for the correct. But if I'm the agent writing the offer and this $600 is because it's whatever their 13-month or whatever that is, I'm going to write it in here. What is it? So like the 13-month platinum or whatever. I don't remember the names of it right now. But if I know that that's what this is going to cover, then I need to put it in so that it makes sense for the 600. See, what happens is if I put 600 in there and I don't put that there's extra coverages, escrow's technically not supposed to just order up to whatever $600 is. They're supposed to do what this is. Okay, well, that's home warranty. There's no coverages in there. So it's a minor home warranty. They can't pick and choose what coverages are going to get added for the 600. You guys have to be clear. So as a buyer's agent, if you're going to ask for an amount, make sure that you're stating what that amount is going to cover. If you're just asking for a basic, then make sure you put the right amount for the basic. And if you're a listing agent, you do the same thing. I don't know what the basic costs for Old Republic anyway right now, so it doesn't matter, but put the basic in. And the reason I say that is because we talk about strength of offer, that it's hard to get offers accepted, or you want to make sure your offer looks the best. If you put $600, then I have to say to my seller, if I'm the listing agent, hey, this net is going to be $600. You right? It's going to affect your net by $600 as opposed to $350 because all they wanted was a basic. So be clear on what it is that you're asking for. Now, if your buyer does not want a home, doesn't want a home warranty, then just please make sure that you check buyer waives home warranty plan. Again, strength of offer stuff, I don't have to counter. If there's nothing in here and this box isn't checked, as listing agent, I got to counter. And I'm not saying that as listing agent, I wouldn't counter saying anyway, hey, I'm going to give you a basic home warranty, even though you didn't ask for it, just because I know it helps protect my seller too after the fact. I may still counter and say, I'm going to give you a basic home warranty. But if there's nothing in here, I got to counter something. I have to either put that they're waiving it or that I'm providing one anyway. As listing agent, if buyer didn't specify certain coverage, then could we just order a basic home warranty instead of countering the max price? You could, but I would still counter the max price because it's going to lead to issues down the road. Hey, you agreed to $600, right? They're going to fight. I'd rather not fight. I'm going to make it clear from the beginning. Here's what a basic home warranty is. This is what I'm paying, so that there is no question later that I should have paid for something else. And I don't want to give the option because I'm saying most escrows won't, or most people who don't that are ordering them won't. But there's a chance that somebody out there's like, oh, there's $600 here. Let's start ordering all this stuff, and they still order it instead of ordering the basic. So if you're going to counter back, hey, we're only getting the basic, then make sure that you state what the basic plan is, okay, or waive it. Either way, I've got to counter that. In other terms, right? Paragraph 3R. Other terms, it could be anything that you need to address. Things like this offer is subject to interior inspection. And I want to clarify on interior inspection, subject to interior inspection. I still think there's some confusion on what that means. Subject to interior inspection means I'm submitting my offer. This offer is going to be presented. It's going to be accepted or rejected or countered without me seeing the inside of the property. And once it is, then I'm going to go see it. Not because I've submitted an offer, now we're going to go see it, and then you decide if you want to counter my offer or reject my offer. That's not how subject to interior inspection works. And for these offers that are being written subject to interior inspection on properties that are coming soon, right? So in the MLS, right, we know that the statuses are for listings are registered, which is no marketing, no signs, no nothing. Coming soon, which is I can market it all I want, put it on Facebook, put it on Instagram, put it on TikTok, have my sign up, do flyers, cold call it, do everything I want, but I can't show it. And then there's active, right? Where I can do whatever I want. I can show it, I can market, I can do everything I want to do. You, as a listing agent, when you take your listing, you have 2 days from the date you take the listing to have the property either registered, coming soon, or active. You don't have a choice. If you don't do that and somebody reports you, it could be a $2,500 fine. So in registered, I can't market it. I can't put a sign. I can't do anything, but I can show it, and I can show it to anybody that has signed a agency disclosure or now a buyer representation agreement with this brokerage, with your brokerage, whatever brokerage you work for when you're watching this, in the last year. I can show that property to them. Now, I can't go market it, but I can tell the agents in here in my office, I could say at a Friday meeting if I wanted to, hey, by the way, I have this coming soon listing, and if you have a buyer that's already signed a buyer representation agreement with you, I can show you this property. That's perfectly legal, and they can write an offer, and we can go into escrow, and we can do the whole thing, and that's fine. But now I have a listing that's coming soon, and it's in the MLS as coming soon. One of the rules is coming soon is I can't show the property. So if there's a buyer, even my own buyer, that wants that house while it's coming soon, my offer has to be subject to interior inspection, which means I have to accept that offer, open escrow, and then let them into the property to see it. If I do anything other than that, and for some reason the CRMLS finds out I did that, it is a $2,500 fine because I violated the rules of that agreement. So subject to interior inspection works for coming soon properties, but you have to accept the offer, open the escrow, and then let them do the interior inspection. All right, a couple questions in the chat. Let me go back. Let's see. If I have to turn in a listing within 2 days, what if I don't have the picture or missing info for the MLS input sheet? Well, that's not the MLS is not worried about whether you know the correct information for your listing. You should know that if you're taking a listing. Pictures, you don't have to have a picture in the MLS until 5 days after the property's inputted into the MLS. And then at that point, you only have to have one picture of the front of the outside of the property. As long as you have that, you're fine. If you want to go take a picture with your phone so that at the very beginning you could be fine with your picture and your listing being in the MLS and then add more pictures, great, go ahead. You could do that. But they're not going to say, oh, sorry, you couldn't get pictures and oh, you didn't know all the info on your listing. Not their problem. They're not gonna care. Can we start a pocket listing approach with that and just market it in-house only? Would that be legit? So if you want to register a property, as long as your seller understands that they've signed a seller's intent to a seller to exclude from the multiple listing service, they have that signed and they're aware that that's what your strategy is, go for it. I don't have a problem with that. What is the time limit on coming soon? It's 21 days. It is automatically from, and Melissa answered in the chat, automatically. So if I put as coming soon today, 21 days from now, it will go to active. I cannot adjust that up. I can't re-enter it into coming soon. It's going active. So if you're going to use coming soon, know that in 21 days, it'll be active. Jasmine, I'm assuming you put your hand down because that was the only question you have. So subject to interior inspection, other terms. We'll talk more about the MLS stuff in a listing. I want to keep moving. Other things that need to be, that may show up here in other terms. If you're related to the buyer, if you are the buyer, if your corporation is the buyer, you're an officer of that corporation and you're a licensed agent. Those are the kind of things that would go in here. So if, for example, I was representing a sale for my brother, I would put buyer's agent is related to buyer. If I were representing my own corporation, I would put buyer's agent is representing the corporation that buyer's agent is an officer of and acting as a principal for the purchase of the property. If I was just buying it for myself, buyer's agent is representing themselves as principal, as buyer, and as a licensed agent for Century 21 All-Stars. If I was representing one of the other agents in the office, I would disclose that buyer was licensed, and I would put it in here in this part of in the offer and other terms. Okay. So anything else that you'd like to state that you don't have a place for in any other part of the offer, you can write here in other terms of the RPA. Okay. Questions? Okay, good. So paragraph 4 now. We're out of paragraph 3. We're into paragraph 4. This is all of the addendums, or the plural is addenda, all the addenda, advisories, all the things that are going to be attached to this are going to have the boxes checked. So because I checked off the TOPA earlier in paragraph 3, it's already checked here. If this property were a probate, I would check to add that. If it's not a probate, if it's a manufactured home, I would check to add the manufactured home purchase addendum, which has the information for the manufactured home, like my mind just went blank. The serial number, the make, the model, the year, all of that stuff. Okay. So this is where you would see any of those addenda and advisories that are part of the purchase agreement are all going to be right here and checked off, and they should be. Okay. So make sure that this is correct. If you have an addendum for some reason where you needed space, then that would be your addendum would be here, and it would be addendum number 1. If I was submitting an offer as a backup offer, I can include the backup offer addendum, which states what backup number I am, how long is this backup offer good for? What are my contingency periods? That's what the backup offer addendum is. And we'll do a class in the coming weeks that is specifically on addenda and advisories. Okay. Yes. Thank you, Zuli. Yes, I am going to do that. I've done one in the past, but since things have changed a little bit, you could go back to the YouTube channel and there's an older one there for the advisories and addenda, but I will do that coming soon. We'll spend some time. But that's what this is. If their box is checked, these items should be incorporated and should come with your purchase agreement, and you should send it with your purchase agreement when you submit it. So now when we get to paragraph 5, here are all those explanation paragraphs that are referenced here in this second column. So remember, this is all paragraph 3, and what section of paragraph 3 this is. These are the reference paragraphs where if you need more information, you could go there to get that information. And we start that with paragraph 5. Okay, so it's going to talk about the initial deposit, the retention of deposit, right? How that's going to work. It says on there, look, initial deposit, buyer shall deliver deposit directly at escrow holder. If a method other than wire transfer is specified in paragraph 3D1 and such method is unacceptable to escrow holder, then upon notice from escrow holder, delivery shall be by wire transfer. And we've had that happen where an escrow company, even though the purchase agreement was certified check or cashier's check or personal check or whatever that people had agreed to in the purchase agreement, the escrow said, no, thank you. We want a wire and it has to be done. So it's in the purchase agreement and you get pushback from the buyer, obviously, because they were the one that said, I want to do it by check. But they've agreed to in the contract that if escrow says we're not taking the check, we want a wire, they have to provide that wire. Okay. Retention of deposit, paragraph 26, which we'll get to, and I'm going to make sure we got 20. We're going to go 20 more minutes. We're going to get to it. Paragraph 26 is the liquidated damages we'll get to, and this is more talking about how you can retain the deposit, and we'll talk about that when we get to paragraph 26. Here's 5B is talking about all cash offers, which was referenced in paragraph 3, right? Here's some more detailed information about the loans. The first loan, this loan will provide for conventional financing unless FHA, VA, or seller financing or others checked in paragraph 3E1. So if you ever get like, hey, I want to get some more information about this, it's so nice that you just go right here. So like we were just looking at financing right now, right? So you look at the financing section right here and it says, hey, here's the initial deposit amount, 3D1. If you want to know more about your initial deposit, you go to 5A1, which we were just reading. If you want to talk about increase, you go to 5A2. If you want to talk about the loan amounts, you go to 5C1 and 5C2. So it gives you direction on where to go. So even as you're learning this contract, right, as you're starting to learn the document and your buyers have questions and you want to be prepared before you sit down with your buyer, you could just go through this second column of paragraph 3 and then back and forth to those paragraphs and kind of start to educate yourself so that you know what you're speaking on when you do it. Right. I mean, I'm happy that you guys are all here, but I think sometimes when you do it on your own, like when you take the time to dig into this and read it, it sticks better than just me, talking at you guys. So all of those in paragraph 5 are all the financing stuff. Paragraph 6 is about additional financing terms, right? Which is the second loan, which is something that we don't have to worry about. 7 is the closing and occupancy, and it talks about all the stuff that has to be delivered, right? So we talked about the TOPA. If buyer intends to occupy as a primary or secondary residence, and unless otherwise agreed, such as in the CAR form TOPA, the unit buyer intends to occupy shall be vacant at the time possession is delivered to the buyer. And if the property contains more than one unit, within 3 days after acceptance, buyer shall give seller written notice of which unit buyer intends to occupy. Occupancy may impact available financing. Seller shall disclose the buyer if occupied by tenants or persons other than the seller, and attach CAR form TOPA in a counteroffer if not part of buyer's offer. So also keep in mind, if you have somebody who is not a tenant, right? They're not technically a tenant, but they're not also the owner, like adult children. You have to treat them like tenants, okay? Somebody's asking if we can have a class on the commercial purchase agreement. To be honest with you, that's my weak spot. Is I'm not a commercial agent, never was. I don't know a lot about commercial. If you guys want to start learning about commercial stuff, unfortunately, you're going to have to seek some commercial training elsewhere, not from me. I apologize for that. The other thing that I always reference is people put in their counteroffers as is. The purchase agreement already has as is the condition of the property, unless otherwise agreed in writing. The property shall be delivered as is in its present physical condition as of the date of acceptance. The property, including pool spot, blah, 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 it's already as is. Okay. It's already as is. And yes, Jose, that's a great point for you guys here that work for us in All Stars. Ramon Cardenas is approachable and is very kind when it comes to talking to people. Okay, so apparently tomorrow in our meeting, he's going to discuss commercials a bit too, so you guys can get an idea about who he is there. So again, all of these paragraphs you can go through and it talks about the contingencies, the removals, when they're due, when you cancel, how the contingencies move forward. Do the contingencies remain in place? As a matter of fact, Jose and I had a discussion about this a couple weeks ago because he had some friends that were clients of another agent that was telling them they had no right to cancel and was trying to keep their deposit. And we were able to, by using the paragraphs of the contract here in paragraph 14, give them some ammunition on why they did have the right to cancel. Because in paragraph 14, what it does say is if the buyer does not remove their contingency in writing, that contingency continues on no matter how out of time we are. So again, look at paragraph 3, because paragraph 3 is where we're going to do all of the negotiating. And then if you have questions about paragraph 3, you could just go through each of these different explanation paragraphs to get more information. While I'm going down to paragraph 26 and getting into the other things that I want to talk about before we're done today, does anybody have any questions? When you say in writing, you mean in a letter? I don't. Oh, you're talking about for the buyer removing their contingencies, I'm assuming is what you're talking about. No, that's a contingency removal form, not in letter. No, there's a form called the CRB, and then there's the CRS. Those are contingency removals for the buyer to remove their contingency, not in a letter. No. Okay, paragraph 26, liquidated damages. So I'm not going to read it, but what liquidated damages says is this. I, buyer, am committing that if I act in bad faith, that I will surrender my initial deposit up to 3% of the purchase price of the property. Okay. Whichever is less. You, seller, are saying that I am okay with accepting as a compensation for my damages of you acting in bad faith, keeping your deposit, and the maximum being 3% of the sales price. Now, you cannot exceed the deposit amount. It's just saying whichever one is less, right? So let's say, for example, you wrote a crazy offer, right? And it was a $500,000 purchase price. I know there's not a lot of those anymore. And you put in a $20,000 deposit, right? So now your deposit has exceeded the 3%. If there were a dispute and the buyer were to lose their deposit, they would only lose that $15,000, which would be 3% of the $500,000 purchase price. The other $5,000 would get returned to them. If my deposit were $10,000 and 3% is $15,000, the seller can't say I want $15,000. They have to be okay with accepting the 10. Okay. So here's the benefit for both clients. If, for example, we don't initial this as buyer and say we want to be liquidated damages where we limit our loss to that 3% or our initial deposit, if we don't do that and the seller can prove damages that exceed that 3% amount, or whatever the amount is, they can prove damages that you caused them this monetary damage. They could sue for that amount, or we'll talk about we'll talk about dispute resolution in a moment. They could go after you for that amount, and they could recoup that fee from you as buyer. So the benefit for the buyer is, I know that if I do something wrong, if I really blow it and I breach this contract, I know that my loss is limited to my initial deposit or 3% of the purchase price, whichever is less. As seller now, the benefit for me is I don't have to prove the damage. See, now instead of having to show, hey, this is what it cost me because you guys breached the contract, I already have a commitment from the buyer to say, here you go. Here's my deposit because I acted in bad faith and I breached the contract. The only 100% way of showing a lack of showing bad faith and breach of contract is the buyer's already removed all of their contingencies and then chooses to cancel. Okay. Any other time is you got to try to prove how they acted in bad faith, what they did to shoot themselves in the foot and cause this transaction to cancel in order to try to keep their deposit. It doesn't work any other way. Okay. So that's what liquidated damages means. Here's the thing. It's only for 1 to 4 units, and it's only for individual buyers. It's not for corporations. Okay. So if you have an investor, right? If you have an investor that's purchasing the property, even if they're buying it on their own, it's for buyers that intend to occupy. This is the only thing that protects those buyers. Otherwise, anybody else could be unlimited damages if those damages can be proved. So if you have an investor that's purchasing this to not live in the property, you don't need to even bother with this because it doesn't matter. You see right here? Right here. If the property is a dwelling with no more than 4 units, one of which buyer intends to occupy, then the amount retained shall be no more than 3% of the purchase price. So that 3% protection doesn't exist for investors. Period. Now, the seller could still ask you to initial it because they're saying, I want you to forfeit your deposit. But that protection of 3% doesn't exist. So if the buyer's deposit on an investment exceeds the 3%, the seller could request to keep all of that deposit. Okay. On an investor. This is only protecting individual buyers that are going to move into one of the 1 to 4 units. Okay. Who do you prove liquidated damages to? Well, here's the issue. You're probably going to end up in some kind of dispute. Most people don't just go, okay, I initialed it. Here's my money. Bye. People are going to fight, right? So that's where we get to the dispute resolution section where you have to prove your case. And here's dispute resolution, right? It's mediation. So this section, paragraph 27 right here, no matter if paragraph 28 gets initialed, you're required to go through mediation. So what that means is that prior to any lawsuit or arbitration case, you have to do mediation first. Any party that refuses to go to mediation cannot get their legal fees paid for by the person who loses the dispute if you've refused to do mediation. So, for example, I'm the seller. The buyer breached the contract. I sent cancellation instructions to escrow to keep their deposit. The buyer is refusing to sign that. Okay. And the deposit exceeds the amount that we would go to small claims court for. Then I would have to start by requesting mediation from the buyer so that we would go through mediation. If, as dispute resolution goes, the arbitration of disputes, if the dispute, the amount that we're fighting over, falls under the jurisdiction of small claims court, which is now $12,500, then I just go straight to small claims and I don't have to go to mediation. But if it exceeds that and I have to either go through litigation or arbitration, and that's the decision based on paragraph 28, then I have to go through mediation first. And CAR has a consumer mediation website. It costs $500 to get it started. And that's how you would start that process. And that's who is going to decide on this liquidated damages clause if you have proof that that person acted in bad faith. Okay. So mediation, whether you initial paragraph 28 or not, you have to go through mediation if it exceeds, like, if it isn't part of small claims court. And that's what this is. Arbitration and disputes. What it says basically by initialing paragraph 28 is, instead of me suing you in court where we get in front of a judge or a jury and we hire attorneys and do all that things and it's a litigation, we will go to arbitration as an alternative. Here's the thing. This is purely about your buyer and or seller choosing to do this. Like, it's their preference. People used to say, oh, it's faster and it's cheaper. Not really. I mean, slightly faster. Maybe it's a little bit cheaper to go through arbitration. It's just, the reason it's a little bit faster is because you don't have to wait for court dates and things like that. It's a little bit less because you're not keeping, you still have to hire an attorney. So it just becomes a preference. The thing with arbitration is there is no appeal. So if you lose in arbitration, so mediation and arbitration are very similar, right? Mediation is the mediator sits and listens to both sides. They listen to the seller's argument. They listen to the buyer's argument. They come back and they say, this is what I think. I think the seller is wrong, or I think the buyer is wrong. With mediation, though, the two parties can look at each other and say, I don't like it. I'm not agreeing to it. Let's move on to arbitration if we've initialed this. Now, when you get to arbitration, same thing. It's one person, right? They're usually a retired judge or an attorney or a real estate, somebody like that. And they will sit and listen to both sides, seller side, buyer side. They'll come back and say, yeah, seller, you're right. Buyer, you're wrong. Or buyer, you're right. Seller, you're wrong. This is what my ruling is. Pay it. And you have to, then it becomes binding at that point. Okay. And you can't go back and appeal it. Now, if I were to go to litigation and I had the money, I had the means, I had the motivation to, if I got a judgment against me in a courtroom, I could appeal that if I wanted to spend the money and do that. With arbitration, you cannot. So there's really not much for, we shouldn't be telling people how they make this choice. We just explain to them, this is what arbitration is. This is what mediation is. And if any of the disputes that come up from this contract fall under the guidelines of small claims court, you don't have to follow either 27 or 28. You just go directly to small claims court. So basically anything under 12,500. Questions about paragraph 27 and 28? No. All right. Okay. So last thing that I want to get to is these entity buyers and entity sellers. Okay. If you guys would check these boxes, right, for like an entity buyer, if my buyer is a corporation, a partnership, a trust, if I check off entity buyers and I put the information in here with my offer, I do not need an RCSD, which is a representative capacity signature disclosure. It's not required if you do this. If you don't fill out this section, then the RCSD is required. Okay. So if your property is an entity if your buyer is an entity buyer, a corporation, a trust, whatever, a partnership, you need to put that information in here, the name of the entity. If it's a trust, it's got to be the complete name of the trust. Okay. Once I do that, then whoever is the authorized signer on behalf of that entity, their names go here. Their names go here. Or sorry, the trust name or whatever his name goes here. The authorized signer's name would go here and they would sign and what their title was. So just please make sure that if you have entity buyers or same thing, entity sellers, you're filling this out. Otherwise, an RCSD is required. Okay. If you are countering an offer, please make sure before your seller signs it that you have that box checked. And if you're sending them a backup offer with that counter, then make sure that box is checked before your seller signs it, so that way we know that it's related to a counter and a backup offer addendum. And technically, legally, the right way to do this is this should be signed with the counter. I know we don't do it. We do counters first and then come back and sign this and do it. Just make sure those boxes are checked so that everybody knows that they're still subject to that counter that was already fully executed, because escrow is going to ask for it. Okay. Offer not accepted. If this offer is not accepted and it's not countered, this needs to be done, initialed by the seller and the date that the seller initials it. The offer was not accepted by the seller on this date, and the seller needs to initial it. The other thing that needs to happen is you have to fill out this section, presentation of offer, agent's initials and date, and send it back. You should be doing this on its own. Just send these 2 pages back to the people that you're rejecting their offers. Now, if you don't do that, if you just send a message and say, your offer was rejected, if the buyer's agent sends you a written request for proof of presentation and you don't do it, that is a fine for the CRMLS and a fine for CAR, because you don't have proof that the offer was presented. So if anybody ever requests proof of presentation, just do this and send it back to them. Now, if you did a counter offer and they don't get their counter offer accepted, they can't then request this. They have proof of presentation because they received a counter offer. Okay. And that's just so you guys understand that can happen. So I've had so many conversations with agents like, hey, this guy's asking me for proof. I already told them just do it, because it's right here. Presentation of offer pursuant to the National Association of Realtors Standard of Practice 1-7. If buyer agent makes a written request, seller's agent shall confirm in writing that this offer has been presented to seller. It's right in there as standard of practice. So you can't avoid that. I don't know what the consequence of that is, but it is a consequence. So please, please, please don't fight with people when they're asking you for proof of presentation. Okay. All right. So we did it. I promised you that I would get through the end of this, and I did it. If you have any questions, you can always come back and see me. Let me see. Is there a time limit deadline besides expiration, which we must respond to their offer? No, it's technically you should be responding within that expiration period date. That's why we talked about during counters and communication with buyers agents, let them know when those offers are going to be presented so that they can adjust the expiration date. And if they don't, in your counters, please make sure that you're countering that expiration date, that offer is still valid at the time of presentation. Okay. Any other questions? I have I made a little update to the counter PDF that and I'm still looking at it to make sure that it's all up to date because of the changes of the contract. So I'm thinking next class is we're going to look at counters again. And then probably the class after that will be the addendas and the advisories. So if you guys need anything, you know where to find me. Remember, this video will be up on YouTube later today. So if you missed any of it while we were here live, please go see that. If you guys are checking out the videos and you know of people that aren't checking them out, send them out, share them, subscribe, like the stuff that's on there. I really appreciate it. I am so happy that you guys come and listen to me for an hour every week. I appreciate your attention. I'm hoping that I'm making you guys better professionals. So go out there and be productive. Take care of yourselves. Talk to you soon.